A very good evening to all of you. I am Dina Rodrigues and I welcome you to Humanity 2.0, brought to you by End Bonded Labor and Justice Collective. Humanity 2.0 is a web series of conversations with authors, storytellers, writers, poets who express themselves on matters related to justice. In recent times, the topic of migration has seeped into the public discourse and is now part of our dinner table conversations. The pandemic and the migrant crisis has led us to invest deeply in conversations spurred by art. To kickstart the series, we have none other than Nirmala Govindarajan from Bangalore. She is a renowned author, journalist, and social sector documentarian. She has written several books, and her book, Hunger's Daughters, was born out of her experiences as a social sector documentarian. The book brings you skin to skin with young breadwinners, all girls whose context to life is acute poverty, induced mainly by socio-political contingencies that prevail the nation. Her recent book, Taboo, was inspired by documenting underage girls who are kidnapped and trafficked. It was launched in December 2019 and has been shortlisted for the prestigious Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize. Without further ado, I would like to invite Nirmala Govindarajan, who some of us fondly call Nimi. Thank you so much, Nimi, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Dina. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be with you this evening and to be part of the series that you've so thoughtfully initiated.
So, how are you doing during this lockdown phase? I know for a fact that it's been very tough on some voracious readers who haven't been able to read much. Are you reading something currently, and what is it about?
Yeah, that's right. As for everyone else, the lockdown has been a little hectic. Although we have so much time on our hands, there's so much else to do as well. I've been reading, although I haven't read as much as I'd have liked to. But then I've read a whole lot of interesting books because I was at a few literature festivals and met a few authors, and I picked up a few books that they had written. So I was reading Hansa Sowendra Shekhar's My Father's Garden, then of course Margaret Atwood's Testaments, and then I read what else? I've read, yeah, of course, 40 Rules of Love by Elif Shafak. In fact, I picked up 40 Rules of Love because I had earlier read her other novel, 10 Minutes and 38 Seconds in this Strange World. And that's a very interesting book because of the novelty of the way she addressed the story, the intensity of the characters, and the story itself, which revolves around the trafficked woman. And then also a very interesting book called Amma, written by Perumal Murugan. It's a translation from the Tamil. It's been translated by Nandini Murali and Kavita Muralidharan, but the author is Perumal Murugan. And it talks, they're little vignettes from rural Tamil Nadu, which is and picked up from Murugan's personal life, where where he lived with his mother, and he talks. It's a very with his mother. His mother is of course the epicenter of the book, as the title itself suggests. It's very evocative and plays on the strengths of the rural Indian woman. I really liked this book.
Very interesting. I must try and get my hands on those books. Nimi, you have a degree in industrial relations, economics, and sociology, and you went on to pursue a master's degree in English literature. Can you walk us through your journey? What really inspired you to be a journalist, then a social sector documentarian, and an author? When did you first realize the impact of your written words?
When I was about 8 years old, I started writing poetry. I was an only child, and I had lots of books to read. My parents gave me a lot of books to read, and I had this little diary in which I wrote poems about everything, the little squirrel and anything at all I saw. And it also helped that my mom was an author. She was a Kannada. She wrote in Kannada and Hindi. and she always encouraged it so much. And I think it's also in the, maybe it's a genetic thing, so I don't know that I'm writing, and also I loved reading. But then when I was in school, because I was in an ICSE school in Sacred Hearts, and English, the English language was something that I really loved, because, and especially because I feel that English has limitless possibilities. It is a language that's made up of so many loan words over the centuries. And even, one of the newest words to join the English language is IO, and the Indian word IO is part of the dictionary,
Yes.
you know. But then, so of course, then I went on to do a degree in industrial relations, because I thought I'd do my MBA. Everyone was talking about an MBA, and you know how we get here. But when I was still in school, I went to a lot of writing competitions, and my strongest subject was English. I always wanted to be a writer. Even when I was in 8th standard, I decided I'd be a journalist. But somehow I meandered and said, I'm going to do this. Of course, that was good fun. I was in Joseph's because I just wanted to be in Joseph's. That's it. After Sacred Hearts, my dream was to be in Joseph's, and I don't think they had an English literature course then. So I did this. And then soon after, as I finished the course, I ended up doing a course in journalism from the Media Center, where I met Mr. Peter Colasso. And then I did another course in advertising. And then I went on to start working with Peter. Peter is an former ad man, and has written this best-selling book on Bangalore. He went on to be my foster parent, my guru, my guide, and the person who's influenced my life the most, and very great. So between my mom and Peter, I think I've been zoned into this world of, you know, writing, storytelling, and also, I mean, went into the world of social sector documentation because of Peter. My mom herself grew up in rural India in a small town called Kadu. So, I think these two people have had a huge influence on my life. And so I went back to it. So there was that little deviation, but that happened. And of course, the rest is what it is.
I'm so glad that you took that part. I'm familiar with Mr. Peter's work. He has also collaborated, I think, with Paul Fernandez on some
Yes.
projects, and Paul is also a good friend of mine. Yes.
Paul
Today,
illustrated that book on Peter. Paul illustrated for Peter's book on Bangalore. He also calls Peter his mentor. So I know Paul. So we have another common connection, Paul. Great
great,
chap,
yeah.
yeah.
I love Paul's work. This evening we are talking about the transformative effect of books. These encounters have definitely impacted your life. Like I read somewhere that you have made significant changes to your lifestyle after you've encountered these survivors. In some way, do you hope to impact lives of your readers and influence them in some way?
So, years ago, just a few years ago, my good friend Catherine Raja, we were in college together. She went on to work with the social sector full time, and I was working in the Times of India. And she said, Nimi, we want to do we need some documentation work done. She's working for this NGO development focus, and they were working in rural Orissa. She said, we need funds because we are no longer getting foreign funds to support our Indian projects. So, and these are the poorest regions of the country. Would you come and, help us to do some storytelling so that, we could use it to further raise funds? So I agreed very wholeheartedly, and I went off on this honorary assignment to Orissa, and we got off this flight in Bhubaneswar, and then soon after that, I found myself on a night bus, a rickety red night bus with open windows and full of people walking in and out, and we were suddenly in dense jungles where the bus halted, and I was told these are all Naxal intense forests. We were headed towards a location called Kionjar, right? And then it was the most, and then we reached there, and then in the morning, and I found myself in the midst of this most beautiful, scenically remote village, which could probably have been Switzerland or somewhere, although I haven't visited any of these European nations. But from looking at picture postcards, I could well tell you that it was as beautiful as that, untouched, wildlife everywhere, people, the entire area inhabited by the tribals of the region and the wild animals, and of course the vernaculars, and unfortunately industrialists trying to take over these lands. But then it was still pristine, and I saw how people over there didn't wear watches, but they could tell what time of day it was. They lived in these meager hutments and slept so well because they worked so hard during the day. And so when I came back uh, from Orissa, and I mean, of course, I did the documentation work. I sat back, I realized that this collection of watches I had was meaningless. I didn't have expensive watches, but I had a collection of colorful watches which I matched with every outfit and stuff like that. So I just stopped wearing watches. And then I also realized that, when I was in Orissa, we stayed in these very dingy small hotels where I couldn't sleep because I did not have a soft pillow. So I decided, I mean, if my mind is clear and if I've had a good day, why do I need a good pillow? I may as well sleep without a pillow. So I got rid of a pillow. I've stopped using a pillow under my head, and I sleep beautifully, and I can sleep anywhere because I gave up that habit. So these are little things. And of course, I stopped, trying, because I know I completely stopped wearing gold because I saw what was happening to people over there. And so when I sat down to actually write the story of write Hunger's Daughters, which was my first book, and then came the book, I was talking about young breadwinners like Sushanti, who's the protagonist of my story, and I was talking, and every day I had these two students of communicative English from Mount Carmel College who were interning in Times of India at that time, reading what I wrote, and there I had my target audience. I was talking to the city girl about the girl from rural India, without putting anyone down because they were living two separate lives, you know. And so that was the beauty of it. And going forward, one of the girls, Yogita, to whom the book is dedicated to, she decided on a career change. She is working with the social sector. So
Wow.
it's beautiful. So I set out to impact people, and right in front of me, I saw one person impacted. So that was already, so that felt really awesome.
Wow. Thank you, Nimi, for sharing that. Um, it's very beautiful to hear that. I want to read an excerpt from your book, Hunger's Daughters. It's on page 71. When the persecuted flee, all roads leading home are blocked. This line to me is pretty spooky, and I'm assuming that this was written in 2018 when there wasn't even a sign of a pandemic. Though the problem of migration existed even then, this line is so eerily close to reality, especially in the light of the migrant crisis that we have seen. Did you think of this line or this book when you read about these stories of migrants who were not allowed to even go back home during the pandemic?
I actually wrote this book in 2014, okay, Hunger's Daughters, and then between 2014 and 2015, I brushed it up a bit. I wrote it over a month in 2014, and then I brushed it up in 2015, and it took me a year to locate a publisher, and then another year for it to get published, because it's quite a long process in the beginning. But so that's when I wrote it. Now, this whole crisis, of people being displaced, right, struck me very early in life when I was still growing up, when I was still a young nursery kid or a first standard kid in growing up in Madras. I spent the first few years of my life in Madras. And we walk on the pavement And I would see little boys polishing shoes, and then there were so many people living on the pavements with obviously no address, right? And you wondered where they came from. And my mom would tell me, they probably come from a village, or they did not. Now they probably don't have any connections to these places. So and then in later years, of course, I saw when you travel, even at a construction site which is happening in front of your house, the fact that you find so many people from Orissa, and you find these contractors cheating them because they speak in their local language civilly, and they're not getting the prescribed daily wages. And because I've seen it, I'm able to communicate a little to them and say, please report the case. Or I'm able to question the contractor who I see, but then it's happening all over the place. And these people are coming and living here in little hutments or in little sites that are not occupied, right? And so it's all very disturbing, because this problem of homelessness and this great divide between the rich and the poor has been around no matter which government is in power. I don't trust any government or anybody to have kind of worked towards equalizing this. At least from in my lifetime, I haven't seen it, and it has been very, very unequal, and the divide somehow seems to be continuing to grow.
Nimi, I read somewhere that your inspiration for Taboo came from meeting survivors of sex trafficking who were rescued from brothels and were being rehabilitated with the assistance. You spoke about your friend Catherine Raja, who also works with Freedom Firm. What about that meeting compelled you to write the story? And I ask this because, as a journalist, obviously you are not new to stories of despair, deprivation, or even exploitation. Something about these survivors stayed with you. Uh, what is that?
So I must tell you that as a journalist, I have been writing on art and culture. So I did not really cover these kind of issues. But then, since I've earlier had, experience in social sector documentation, my mind, and I'm totally inclined towards that. My mind and heart tend to pick these stories, or kind of, align with such stories and such people at a more intense and deeper level. So when I first visited Kathy in Uti, when I was just visiting her on a holiday, and then she said, "Come to my workplace with me." And I went to her office, and I found these bunch of giggling girls who were, part of this workshop. Many of them, the oldest must have been about 25, and making fashion jewelry. And I learned that some of them were HIV positive. I learned about their lives, how they had been trafficked when they were under 18 and had been rescued as adults. But then they were now learning to live a very respectable life by doing these things. And they were so upbeat. They were so energetic. And, it was very beautiful to see them. So that kind of stayed with me. And then a few months later, Kathy said, "Why don't you visit our workshop in Kolkata?" So I went to Calcutta, and I visited the workshop where I met many more women who had been through similar situations. And I was talking to this girl called Shoyantika, changed her name, of course. And this girl was all of 22, and she was giving me her wedding invitation. She was going to marry the love of her life. I was so excited. But then she had been traded when she was 8 years old by her own brother and sister-in-law, and sold off to a brothel where, the pimp told her that she must see her first customer the very day. This child, of course, was petrified. And one of the older women over there, who must have been around 50 or whatever, she said, "Don't worry, I'll protect you." And she kind of tried to help this child, and the pimp got wind of it, and he stabbed that woman to death in front of this child. And this kid, of course, later had to go through all the ordeals, and somehow uh, she was rescued from a hotel in rural Bengal when she was about 15 or 16, and had then been brought, and then been brought to rehabilitate, and then she had joined the workshop, and she had grown up to be the workshop manager. But what was amazing is she had also now found the ability to find love, to love and to be loved the way she wanted, and she's going to marry the love of her life. And all this had a very huge and deep impact on my soul. In fact, for much of my writing, if you notice, either in Hunger's Daughters or Taboo, I am a very spontaneous writer. So I have no framework, or it's a very stream of conscious process. And the transformation that has happened in my being is also something that reflects in the storytelling. And I hope that has a more personal touch. And I also use elements of magic realism because I'm an optimist. I'm a huge optimist at heart. So to kind of integrate the story.
I agree with you that especially when we meet with these survivors, we learn so much. Their grit, their resilience. There's a lot of sort of positive rub off on our lives. I'd like to read an excerpt from Taboo. The Constitution does not address the footpath at all, and certainly not matters of mere passion between people who dwell upon it. The people of the footpath have no postal address, and the Constitution cannot be held responsible for their lack of privacy in a public place. The fellows of the footpath have neither address nor identity. They are poorer than the vote casting population, which lives in an asbestos roofed homes in urban slums. The asbestos roofed homes are meant for people who cast votes for the minister of something or the other to earn their postal address, and more importantly, their daily wages to meet life's bare necessities. And somewhere else you write, Perumal Arokya Swami's postal address is a closed door. The idea of not having a postal address and what it means really stood out to me because at this time, let me explain to you why. During this very unfortunate migrant crisis, in one of our cases, we had reached out to a laborer to send his address so that we're able to help him out and support him. And he actually sent us an address of a boat because he was living on that boat for many months. To me, that was really heartbreaking. And let me ask you this question. When you decided to write about the plight of trafficking victims, was it your intention to draw to the reader's attention the cyclical link to poverty and exploitation?
I don't know whether it was a conscious intention, but as a person, as a human, I have expressed this issue the way I have looked at it or the way I have experienced it, and of course, I have also heard about people who are willingly in the trade, who are into high level trafficking. Some of the industries and organizations also use the services of such escorts, as you may call them. I'm not very certain whether their problems are as similar or exactly the same as those who have come from a point of nothing, right? Or who have come from a point of security where they had no idea that this is what they were getting into. I don't know because I haven't really interacted with people who have chosen to be escorts of their own I mean, I haven't had any deep interactions with them, so it's at this point it's probably not. I have no clear views on that. But then definitely, when especially when people get into uh, trades like sex work, they are often disowned by their own families. Many of these girls were disowned, and they're not taken back even after they're rehabilitated. So, and they find themselves displaced. They find themselves disrespected, and sometimes they wonder, am I doing the right thing by getting back? And it's amazing that organizations, I mean, hats off to organizations like the International Justice Mission, Freedom Firm, which are making it possible for women to find self-worth, find their own addresses, to find their own meaning in life. And even if it impacts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each of these cases is so important, because they in turn could influence so many more people.
Yes, talking about addresses, it's heartbreaking that today what you've written in your books, Taboo, and as well as Hunger's Daughters, it's a fictional book, but it's actually so close to reality. In Hunger's Daughters, there is a group of Odia construction workers trying to flee a town in Tamil Nadu via a train, and they've just been chased out with knives and swords from a place that they've been deemed unfit for. They're unable to even get train tickets to go back home. And just to read from that section, the train chugs to life with ticketless laborers, Ital, and Narain watches the people from his state, men, women, and their children, their hands, legs, heads bobbing out of the doors and iron grilled windows of the exploding bogies. The persecuted are going home to barren lands, brick kilns, and mining companies, to a land where all their means of livelihood are exploding with wrath for the elected democracy. The words persecuted are going home to barren lands, brick kilns, and mining companies. This is so true. True to our migrant workers who are returning home. What was going through your mind when you wrote this?
This is exactly what I'd seen, because as I said, when I first went to Odisha, this was, I think, in around 2012 or 2011, even in those years, it was the same. Nothing has changed. And in fact, more and more mining companies are taking over. Whole families were being taken away to work in brick kilns, and their children were left in the care of the other villagers, and I know exactly what's going on. People are not allowing development in these tribal regions. If you went to Odisha, they practice singular cropping till date. They do not have check dams. They do not have, in some of these remote villages, they do not have, uh, artificial tanks, to store waters when there's excessive rain. I mean, I've seen their paddy crops being washed out overnight, and each person over there is half my size, and I don't have much of a size to talk about. So, you know, so the thing is, all of this existed then, it still exists now. So somewhere, uh, we as a nation, we have failed to notice that this has been building up, because the crisis that we are facing today in terms of migrant labor wasn't born today. It was coming. It was coming with few people having their eyes on the issue and few empaths. But in a world full of capitalists, there is little else uh, we can expect, unless we all turn around and actually open our eyes to what's happening. Because in a city, especially in India, I was telling somebody the other day that, a neighbor cleans up his site and throws the garbage into yours. They're not bothered, right? Or people come, they want to buy a lot of cars and jewelry and stack it up all over the place. We are not exactly thinking about either spending our money on going and understanding the world, or putting ourselves out uh, to other people. So it's, and also, our priorities are very, I don't know, maybe because of the struggles we've gone through earlier as a nation. I don't know, because we don't have probably because we don't have a proper social security system, even as middle class people. Even someone like me, lives on the edge. Although I live in a good house, whatever, I have a good education, I've opted out of a full-time job because I wanted the freedom to be able to write more books. So I work as a consultant for various social sector organizations. So for the past 3 months, I haven't had work either, as with the labor. But the thing is, I'm not going ballistic about it because my needs are very few, and I know one will pick up the strings when things clear. But that is not true, right? People, not everyone is a risk taker. Not everyone feels comfortable with changes or the vicissitudes of life, and so these are things that we are not, which have made us very, as a society, which has made us very, very, very selfish, I feel. And we are not, you know, the other day some Paura Karmikas came home. They were sweeping the streets and they wanted water. And I was running for a meeting, but then I opened it, unlocked the door, and I gave them some water. And I left. She said, "Thank you so much, Ma, because people on the other street said, get out of the house. We can't give you water. There's coronavirus." I said, "You don't go to their places. They might have it. You come here if you want, but if somebody talks to you like that, you please don't go to their places." Right? It's like so. I mean, people are so mean. What stops you from putting on a mask and giving them water? I don't understand. So it's these kind of things all over the place. It's very, very heart-wrenching. And obviously, many of these Paurakarmikas have their roots in rural India, right? They come here to make a living in the city. And very often when I travel to rural India, I ask people, why do you stay here? Why don't you just stay here and do your farming? The life is so difficult. And if I had farmlands, I'd just live here. But then, of course, there are all the difficulties of the uncertainty of farming itself in India, where farmers are not given their rightful dues, and the seasonal rains, and the government policies that do not reach them. So there are so many.
Absolutely. It's really unfortunate about the lack of civic sense that we have in urban India. Um, you specifically mentioned about, not all people are risk takers. And, you know, the books that you've written really talk about the harsh realities. It's very serious. Did you worry about the grimness of the subject that might work against it? Were you concerned about that?
Actually, when I started to write Hunger's Daughters, I had this audience which was reading it every day. And they'd keep asking me, and they were both students of communicative English. It was Paska and Yogita. They would read it every day and ask me, what's happening next? What's happening next? And of course, along the way, of course, it just flowed the way I did because there was no plan. And then magic realism came in, and then it went on to, have a very different kind of, the book itself assumed a different attitude uh, to have an optimistic ending. So where it starts as a grim thing, there's also a lot of hope. There's a lot of dimension to it, which I've tried to give it, which was also kind of well accepted by the readers, who are my primary target audience. So, and similarly with Taboo, actually.
You also have a very, very distinct style, very poetic, lyrical, musical style to your writing. And I read somewhere that you play the piano and the violin. How much has your music impacted your or influenced your style of writing?
So I can't do anything without music. So even when I was working in Times of India, I would have these headphones and I'd be writing my articles. So and everything would flow the way the music flows. So the pattern of the piece, way, and it would just flow and it would be different. So similarly, when I learned the piano earlier, when I was younger, I had learned Indian classical music. So and when I was writing both, in fact, I wrote Hunger's Daughters and Taboo one after the other. In fact, both were complete by 2015. And I was learning to play the violin at that time. Learned the piano earlier. So I would go, like, even when the books were panning out, there'd be these sudden states of, crescendo, and then there'd be this vivace. Then there would be a fugue where you're like trailing off and going somewhere else. And then, but it all kind of comes back and culminates into a grand finale as a good composition. Concerto would kind of, explode at the end, with joy divided. So music, yeah, has been such a beautiful influence, and it kind of also addresses the flow of my being and the way the words come out and everything, because I'm not a structured person. So, and I also believe that true creativity in any form should not be structured. Whereas you understand the structure, you mustn't allow structure to inhibit or bind your work of art, because then you will sound exactly like somebody else. Allow yourself to flow and be.
Absolutely. In advertising, we call it the creative liberty.
Yeah.
So I'm glad, because as a reader, we can definitely sense that in your writing style. So, on a lighter note, I want to ask you, since most of what you write is so close to reality and the injustices in it, do you have books that you read that maybe sometimes help you escape that reality? Or what is it that you do, for a break?
Actually, I perpetually live in a state of dreaminess. So I experience this reality, but I seem to be floating on some cloud. So, of course, I play musical instruments, I'm riding the sun. Not apparently possible, but is possible because somebody has created that possibility for you. And yes, I'm hugely influenced by these kind of alter realities, as you may call it, but they are my reality.
When I was just looking through your website, something really struck me. It said, towards an equal world. This pandemic has, really brought out more than ever the stark distinction between the haves and the have-nots. Why do you think it took us the pandemic to make us realize what an unequal society we live in?
Suddenly in the pandemic, everybody is beginning to feel what they're missing, what's lacking. People are losing jobs. People are, they're living in such uncertain times. Um, they're suddenly living the lives of these migrants. Even today, if I see these migrants and these laborers working at construction sites, they don't seem to be as bothered as people like us who are walking around with masks and worried about our future. They have been that life has always been that way for them, so they're just taking it as it comes. And we've suddenly found ourselves over there, and we are still learning how to take it as it comes.
Interestingly, the pandemic is teaching us many things. I'd like to read another excerpt from Hunger's Daughters. These women from Indian hamlets, tier 2 cities, also towns and district headquarters, are naturally conditioned to serve their children, their men, near relatives, and distant cousins, especially from their husband's family line. Women serve men everywhere. This is considered to be the will of nature, the word of God. Is God a man? It's very interesting because all over social media now, people talk about natural conditioning of women, which is actually social conditioning. And during the pandemic, across social media, you'll see many men being praised for doing household work and helping the women at home. What do you have to say about this so-called paradigm shift? Do you think it's momentary?
Well, I'd like to give a small example. When I was working, I think in Deccan Herald, maybe many years ago, I was sent to cover this I was supposed to write about an NGO, and I forget the name of the organization. It was many, many years ago. And I met this person. He belonged, it was called some Dalitara Sangha or something like that, right? So I was talking to him about equality. He said, Madam, you keep all your feminist theories to yourself. That is meant for people like you. In our society, men, we sweep the house. When the woman is not able to, I also sweep the house. When my wife is giving birth, I help with the labor. I sit with my wife and drink together. And if she gets angry with me, she also beats me up. That was the first time it hit me hard that in a so-called more advanced societies, we are more restricted, right? And in later years, when I went to Orissa and all that, I saw how people in the villages would sit, they would share a drink together, or they would, but of course, in villages in Rajasthan, I saw women sitting in boongats and smoking beedis, and the men folk also smoking beedis without, obviously, in the open. But everybody knows everybody smoking, or smoking the pipe or whatever. But then the household work is done by the woman. She wakes up at 4 in the morning, does everything. And I've always been, even through my growing years, I've always said, you know, people used to call me a female chauvinist. I said, but you it was really funny, because I always found it peculiar that you have to, the woman, only the woman has to be doing a certain kind of work. And here I was being brought up as an only child. I was being, both my parents believed that boy or girl, one has to learn to do everything in life and to stand up by themselves, and to do this and that. And so I'm fortunate to have come up with that kind of a value system. And I always speak up for that. So what's happening on social media is also funny. It's just like a follow up on on what our society has already endorsed or believed in, right? So we just, it's like they say, madam, what do you think, madam? We already do this. So it's like that.
Yeah, that's true. Even when I've traveled, I've seen a lot of societies in Ladakh and in places, and even in Kerala, who have a very matriarchal culture.
Yeah.
So so I've seen it in their families. Um, Nimi, you're a very optimistic person, and since you have dealt with survivors of trafficking, what is your hope for them?
uh, my hope for them is that they, we no longer have to, be it in media or whatever, need to change their name.
So, Nimi, 30th July is World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, and it's round the corner. Considering that both your books actually talk about traffic victims, what is the message you would like to give general public on that day?
So a lot of stuff happens to us, especially to women. Um, I know we need to go through a lot. So a lot of stuff happens, especially to women. So my message is, I know that a lot happens to you, and a lot of people say a lot of things. There's a lot of physical and emotional threats that you're going through, and angst. No matter what happens to you, stand up and respect yourselves. When you respect yourself, everything else will fall into place. That's my
And
message.
thank you so much, Nimi. Uh, your books talk about, very vividly on the violence caused by systemic poverty. And in many places, it talks about the broken criminal justice system. What role do you think books play in influencing public discourse on perhaps protecting people in poverty from violence?
So I don't know. There haven't been, there are a lot of non-fictional books that people, I have quite a few friends who write about rural India in the non-fictional format. And I don't, and then of course I'm attempting to do this in the fictional format. And I'm seeking justice. So the point is, I hope a lot more people read it, because we write literary books. And the way our publishing industry is trending is, we have a lot more what we call cosmopolitan stuff, or
Yeah.
things that people read a lot more, that genre of books that make their way into places. But then it's very important for people like us to keep striving, because at least there are a few readers who read it and are influenced. I'm so fortunate that you, for example, have read my books, and you have so many perspectives and so much to share. And like you, there are a few other people, and I believe there is hope. First of all, books. I mean, a book well intended is something that helps you to look within. Even if you look back at works like Oliver Twist, or in those days, if you look, they were addressing certain issues that needed to be talked about. And these kind of are etched in your mind. And it's important in every era for us to, for some of us at least, to stand up and speak up for these issues in the way that we feel comfortable speaking. And I'm sure there's some small impact with you. But mainstream media or mainstream nothing exactly has any holistic coverage of what we could do for social justice. They circulate among groups of people, among organizations, and we hope. And now, fortunately, the social media has a good impact, and there's a lot happening. And with this pandemic, I think one good thing has happened is a lot of independent groups or individual expressions are out there for people to have access to and to dialogue and communicate. And I think that's a very positive.
Absolutely. And like you rightly said, I think there needs to be more voices who speak about these issues. We need more people reading stuff like that because, as we all know, demand is based on supply, and so hence it is important that more people demand such genres. So thank you, Nimi, for being so courageous to be able to write on topics like these. What advice would you give to aspiring writers who wish perhaps to write on social injustice, but perhaps are apprehensive?
I would first say, experience what you want to write about. Go out there into the world and allow what's happening to percolate to your senses. And once it becomes part of you, turn around, sit down, and express it. Write it for yourself if need be. Share it with a friend, and then move on to the next level. But please do it, because if there's a calling to do it, there are different forms of activism, and this too is a calling. So if it is your calling, please do it. Don't do it if if someone's forcing you to, or you feel it's something that you have to do. No, it's not that way. But if you really feel there is a calling, kindly do.
And Nimi, would you like to read an excerpt from your book? One that perhaps resonates right now with these times.
So both my books, in fact, Rahel Roy Thomas, a friend and musician, has put some of the words from my books to music. So we could, and I mean, you can also hear his music over it. And then I'll read a little bit from there. From both my books, I'm going to read the towards the end, a short paragraph which comes in the grand finale. So we've gone through all the sounds, but then what happens at the finale? So I start with my newer book, Taboo, and here it goes.
Avum, avam, avum, 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 avam, avum, avum, avam, avum.
Matters in the Indian subcontinent are topsy-turvy. In no time, the perpetrators will be punished and traded women will own their bodies, their libertad. Saha abounds in Chandanigarh that the Minister for Shelter's life has turned all topsy-turvy. The caretaker has been found. She is full of life. The Tentodas need to celebrate. Bhima has been found by discerning suitable somebodies who have all, thanks to their stealthy night crawls in Blue Mountain Nilgiris, learnt a thing or two about trekking in sloping terrains to rescue maligned souls. The fellows of the footpaths do not know whether it is indeed time to celebrate. Perumal Arokyaswamy has returned from his holy sojourn with an identity, while the lady with the slender hands has absconded between the hours they shut eye and shout out for dinner. Now, you must read until the end to find out what happens there. And now I take you to my the other world of Hunger's Daughters. This is, of course, happening in the Court of Justice, and it begins with the song Tra la 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 la. So, and you can hear Rahel play it.
Tra la 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 la, tra la 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 la, we citizens from near and far. Tra la 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 la, tra la 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 la, we citizens from near and far are so glad that democracy isn't dying.
Tra la 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 la, tra la 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 la. We citizens from near and far are just so glad that democracy isn't dying. The entire court of justice breaks into song, albeit in scales that Zita has never heard before. Zita patiently waits for the last voice to trail on and continues with her speech. All right, she says. Now listen to my shusha and don't fall asleep. Decades ago, in the late 1960s, when the political party representing far left ideologies set foot on the least developed parts of the country to raise voice against the interpretation of land ceding laws and exploitation of tribal lands for pharmaceutical and mining purposes. Thereafter, governments came and cabinets of ministers changed, but the tribals, the Shantas, Gonds, Kudnis, Mankadias, Mundas, among others, continued to be given the cold shoulder. With their lands and their ancestral livelihoods biting the dust. Uncrowned heads came and went, some completing their 5-year-long tenures and not having raised a tiny finger towards the betterment of these tribals, thus leaving them in the dark for over 6 decades after India's independence, without electricity, sanitation facility, drinking water, nature enabling sustainable livelihood initiatives, rail and road connectivity, and of course, few schools with teachers, if any. Well, I must digress here to praise Naren Nayak for his self-motivated efforts in making education accessible to the children of Unita, especially to little breadwinners like Nominta Deburi. Naren Nayak continues to be selfless, just like Urmila and Manohar Mahapatra. But it has not been the same case with the elected democracy. Largely continues to stay unmindful of sustainable development in the remote rural areas. Members of the Marxist Society who started out with the right foot over the left idea of equitable development with their powerful voices are now up in arms with their powerful weapons instead. Zita Rani takes a brief moment to straighten her spectacles and catches Major Ashok Riflewala snoozing. Mr. Soldier, Zita says sternly. Major Riflewala does not open his eyes. Inspector General Bawa taps him on the shoulder. Major Riflewala promptly opens his eyes and blurts out a series of words. What? Zita gives him a pointed stare and continues with Shusha. The industrialists, largely owners of mining companies, believe they are the sole benefactors of the poorest. While the industrialists benefit, the poor toil. The poor continue to live a life of poverty because they use their ancestral farming skills in lieu of laborious jobs. Now, these laborious jobs will stop providing them their daily wages as soon as they usurp farming lands, the natural habitat of the colored Patrabhaga, have been depleted of their natural wealth of minerals. When power, money, and weapons take precedence over sustainable development, the breadwinners need to take matters into their own tiny hands. We, the democratically appointed crowned head and the Ministry of Equals, some names you already have heard of, others you will hear of as soon after my shusha, which thankfully is about to conclude with this oath. I repeat, we, the crowned head and the Ministry of Equals, will unabashedly stand by the breadwinners, especially little girls and women, both young and old, through thick, thin, and all the die-hard din about squashing feminine power. That is all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nimi, for that. I'm sure our viewers would have loved it if you had gone on further. But as we're running out of time, and we're coming to the end of the session, tell us, what are you working on right now? What's new?
Another book, I'll tell you more about it when it's done later. But then you can look forward to one more issue. I mean, it's again a female power book.
Yes, I'm sure we'd want to know more about it when it gets launched. Thank you so much for your contribution and for being a change agent. I'm very positive that it will impact the lives of many, many readers. I would definitely encourage the viewers to read both the books as they throw some light on harsh realities and on the exploitation of women. Once again, Nimi, it has been an absolute pleasure with you this evening. And we want to thank you on behalf of End Bonded Labor and Justice Collective. We wish you all the best.
And thank you, Justice Collective and Embodied Labor, for inviting me to this discussion. It's really been a very humbling experience.
We have come to the end of the session. Please follow the End Bonded Labor page for information on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Good night.